It wasn't just a circus. It wasn't just a museum. It wasn't even just a business. It was the architectural blueprint for the modern post-truth world. Most people look at the history of media and see a gradual evolution of technology. They see the printing press, and the radio, then the television, then the algorithm. They think the distortion of reality is a bug in the system, a side effect of the internet age, a recent accident caused by silicon chips and fiber optics. But the pattern is unmistakable. The distortion is not a bug, it is a feature. And it was designed, refined, and perfected nearly 2 centuries ago by one man who realized that the truth was not an asset to be protected, but a raw material to be melted down and recast. Phineas Taylor Barnum did not just sell tickets, he sold a cognitive framework. He discovered that if you control the spectacle, you control the consensus. He realized that the public does not want accuracy. The public wants to be part of the debate, and if you can manufacture the debate, you own the mind of the crowd. The mechanics he built in the 19th century are the exact same mechanics running your news feed today. The incentive structure is identical. The psychological trigger is identical. The monetization of outrage is identical. The only variable is the speed of transmission we are living in. Barnum's world, we are walking through his museum, and just like the crowds in 1842, we are paying for the privilege of being deceived. This isn't a story about a showman. It is a story about the industrialization of the lie. It is a story about how the human being was turned into a content unit. It is a story about the 3 specific operations Barnum conducted that broke the barrier between reality and fiction, creating a legacy that would eventually consume the entire information ecosystem. To understand how we arrived at a moment where truth is subjective and reality is negotiable, we must look at the engineer who built the machine. We must look at the 3 distinct phases of his operation: the fabrication of the artifact, the manufacturing of the controversy, and the commodification of the human soul. The pattern repeats the incentives. A line and the outcome is inevitable. Transition to narrative flow. The first phase of the pattern begins not with a roar, but with a whisper in the crowded, soot-stained streets of New York City in the summer of 1835. The American Republic was young, hungry, and intellectually restless. The Industrial Revolution was beginning to churn, creating a new class of urban workers with coins in their pockets and a desperate need for distraction. The constraints of the era where physical news traveled at the speed of a horse or a steamship. Information was scarce. Authority was centralized in the hands of a few editors and clergymen. Under these constraints, the rational move for an aspiring operator was to hack the verification mechanism of the public. Barnum, then a young man with a history of failed lotteries and grocery stores, identified a gap in the market. The public did not have the tools to verify history. They relied on testimony. They relied on the printed word. If the printed word could be compromised, history itself could be rewritten for profit. The asset he chose was a human being. Her name was Joyce Hett. She was an elderly enslaved woman, blind and almost completely paralyzed. Barnum did not see a person. He saw a narrative vessel. He purchased the right to exhibit her for $1,000, a staggering sum for a man of his limited means, roughly equivalent to $30,000 in modern purchasing power. But the leverage he applied made the price irrelevant. The pitch was mathematically precise in its audacity. He claimed she was 161 years old. He claimed she had been the nursemaid to George Washington himself. He claimed she had been present at the birth of the father of the country. Think about the psychological hook. He was not selling a curiosity. He was selling a direct physical link to the sacred founding myth of the nation. He was selling patriotism wrapped in biological impossibility. The operation relied on the credibility borrowing. Barnum knew that if he simply stood on a crate and shouted, he would be ignored. So he weaponized the press. He inundated the New York newspapers with anonymous letters. He played both sides of the chessboard. He wrote letters claiming she was a marvel of nature. He wrote other letters claiming she was a fraud. He manufactured a conflict where none existed, forcing the newspapers to cover the controversy. This is the key mechanism. By creating a dispute, he elevated the exhibit from a sideshow to a matter of public inquiry. People didn't come just to see the woman, they came to judge for themselves. They paid their 25 cents, the price of a good meal, to be part of the jury. The exhibition hall at Niblo's garden was dim-smelling of stale tobacco and damp wool. Crowds shuffled past the frail woman who had been coached to recite verses and sing hymns. Barnum stood in the shadows counting the receipts. The arithmetic was merciless. The controversy drove volume. The volume drove revenue. The revenue allowed him to buy more advertising, which generated more controversy. It was a self-sustaining feedback loop of disinformation. But the biological reality of Joyce Hett was the constraint. She was mortal. She died in February 1836. In a rational world, the death of the exhibit ends the revenue stream. For Barnum, the death was an opportunity for a liquidity event. He arranged a public autopsy. He charged admission. He gathered 1,500 spectators in a medical amphitheater, filling the room with the elite of New York as medical and press establishment. The surgeon Dr. David L. Rogers performed the cut. The physical evidence was undeniable. The curvature of the skull, the condition of the organs, all indicated a woman of perhaps 80 years, not 161. The lie was exposed, the fraud was absolute. But here is the twist that defines the modern era. Barnum did not apologize. He did not retreat. He spun the exposure. He claimed the autopsy itself was the fraud. He claimed the body on the table was a decoy, and that the real Joyce Hett was alive and well in Connecticut. He flooded the newspapers with this new, even more ridiculous lie, and the public devoured it. They argued about the autopsy. They argued about the body. They argued about the surgeon. Barnum realized that the truth of the matter was irrelevant to the consumption of the matter. The engagement was the product. The veracity was merely a variable to be adjusted. He had successfully decoupled the narrative from reality, just like the Roman emperors who debased the silver denarius to maintain the illusion of wealth. Barnum debased the currency of truth to maintain the illusion of value. The precedent was set. The public had tasted the synthetic drama, and they preferred it to the boring linear nature of facts, just like the Joyce Hett affair established. The mechanics of the lie, the next phase, would industrialize the manufacturing of the hybrid. We moved to 1842. The American economy was recovering from the panic of 1837. Deflation had ravaged asset prices. Trust in institutions was at a historic low. The skepticism of the public was higher than ever. To penetrate this skepticism, Barnum needed something that defied categorization. He needed an object that existed in the uncanny valley between science and mythology. Enter the Fiji mermaid. The artifact was a grotesque piece of taxidermy, the upper half of a juvenile monkey, stitched clumsily onto the tail of a dried fish. It was hideous. It was obviously fake to any close observer, but Barnum understood that observation is secondary to expectation. If you prime the mind, the eye will follow. He did not just put the object in a case. He created a fake authority to validate it. He hired an accomplice, Levi Line, to pose as Dr. Griffin, a naturalist from the non-existent Lyceum of Natural History in London. He checked Dr. Griffin into a Philadelphia hotel. He had Griffin show the mermaid to landlords and editors as a favor, feigning reluctance to display it publicly. This is the mechanism of artificial scarcity. By acting as if the object were too scientifically important for the common rabble, he created an intense demand for access. Barnum then unleashed a coordinated media assault that rivals any modern viral marketing campaign. He targeted the major New York newspapers, the Herald, the Mercury, the Atlas. He provided each paper with a different woodcut engraving of a beautiful bare-breasted mermaid. He wrote articles for each paper predicting the arrival of the great Dr. Griffin. He orchestrated the timing so that on a single Sunday morning, every major paper in the city ran a story about the mermaid. Saturation was total. You could not walk down Broadway without hearing about the mermaid. You could not open a paper without seeing the mermaid. The information environment was completely seized by a single fabricated signal. When the exhibition finally opened at the concert hall on Broadway, the crowds were riotous. They expected the beautiful siren from the woodcuts. They found the withered brown monkeyfish hybrid. Did they riot? Did they demand refunds? No, they marveled at the audacity. They argued about whether it was a fossil, a distinct species, or a clever manufacture. Barnum had successfully shifted the product from the object to the conversation about the object. He displayed the mermaid, alongside legitimate natural history exhibits, platypuses, fossils, minerals. He blurred the line between the educational and the fraudulent. He placed the fake inside the context of the real granting. The fake borrowed legitimacy. This is the dilution of standards. By mixing truth and lies in equal proportion, the consumer loses the ability to distinguish between them. The critical faculties of the public were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the spectacle. The box office receipts for the American Museum skyrocketed. Barnum's income rose to nearly $3,000 a week, a fortune that placed him among the wealthiest men in New York. He was no longer a huckster. He was a tycoon of the imagination. He proved that if you control the context, you can sell a dead monkey as a scientific miracle. Just like the Fiji mermaid proved that the public could be made to doubt their own eyes, the final phase would prove that they could be made to abandon their own humanity. We move to the post-Civil War era, the 1880s, the Gilded Age. The American empire was expanding westward. Industrial capitalism was reaching its zenith. The social fabric was being torn by rapid urbanization and the influx of millions of immigrants. The white American populace was anxious, eager to define its place in the racial hierarchy. Barnum, ever the astute reader of the public psyche, understood that the ultimate spectacle was not a dead object, but a living person. But not just any person. He needed to present the other. This brings us to the Ethnological Congress of Savage and Barbarous Tribes. This was the industrialization of the human zoo. Barnum sent agents to every corner of the globe with a simple mandate: bring back specimens. He imported Zulus from Africa. He imported indigenous peoples from the plains. He imported families from Sri Lanka. He imported cannibals from Fiji. He stripped them of their agency, their context, and their dignity, and placed them in pens for the amusement of the paying public. The mechanism. Here is the commodification of identity. He marketed these human beings not as people, but as evolutionary artifacts. He framed them as missing links. He explicitly played on the Darwinian anxieties of the time. Darwin's On the Origin of Species had been published in 1859. The public was obsessed with the ladder of civilization. He placed white, civilized America on the viewing platform and the savage world in the pit. It was a validation of the imperial worldview sold for 50 cents a ticket. Consider the case of William Henry Johnson. Barnum rebranded him as Zip the Pinhead. Johnson was an African-American man, likely born in New Jersey to formerly enslaved parents. He may have had microcephaly, a medical condition. Barnum shaved his head, leaving a tuft of hair on top. He dressed him in a fursuit. He commanded him to remain silent, to grunt, to act. The part of a subhuman creature. Barnum marketed him as the what is it? A creature caught between man and ape. For decades, Johnson performed this role. He was denied his speech. He was denied his history. He was denied his humanity. He was a prop in a racial theater designed to flatter the ego of the white majority. The cruelty was the point. The spectacle relied on the degradation of the performer to elevate the status of the observer. Crowds flocked to see the wild men. They brought their children. They bought souvenirs. The human zoo became a staple of the traveling circus, moving by rail across the continent, spreading this distorted anthropology to every small town in America. Barnum normalized the idea that other human beings were content to be consumed. He turned the suffering of the displaced and the marginalized into a family-friendly Sunday outing. The incentives were clear. The more savage the exhibit appeared, the more tickets were sold, so the performers were pushed to act more aggressive, more primitive, more alien. Reality was meant to fit the stereotype. The Fiji cannibals were often just peaceful villagers paid to gnaw on bones. The operator realizes that attention is the only currency that matters, and that it can be seized by breaking the norms of polite discourse. Stage 2. The fabrication of the artifact. The operator creates a focal point. It does not need to be real. It only needs to be plausible enough to ignite debate. A fake nurse, a fake mermaid, a fake crisis, a fake statistic. The artifact is designed specifically to trigger an emotional response: wonder, fear, or superiority. Stage 3. The credibility borrowing. The operator cannot stand alone. He must hijack the authority of established institutions. He uses the language of science. He uses the format of journalism. He quotes non-existent experts. He creates a Dr. Griffin. He mimics the aesthetics of truth to smuggle in the contraband of the lie. The operator attacks his own product. He plants skepticism. He encourages the debate. He knows that a unified public is a passive public. A divided public is an engaged public. Every argument in the comment section, every angry editorial, every debunking video, it all counts as engagement. It all drives the algorithm. Stage 5, the dilution of reality. The fake is placed alongside the real until they are indistinguishable. The reality star, the viral victim, the public enemy. Stage 7, the total spectacle. The distortion field becomes permanent. The lie becomes the culture. The audience no longer cares what is true. They only care what is entertaining. The operator becomes the king, the president, or the mogul. The transition is complete. The map has replaced the territory. Just like the crowds at Niblo's garden in 1835, we are now standing in the center of the arena. Current data suggests the average person spends 7 hours a day connected to the internet. That is 7 hours a day inside the American Museum. The artifacts have changed, but the structure is identical. Look at the fake news phenomenon. It is not new. It is the Joyce Het strategy at scale. Websites fabricated in Macedonia create stories about political figures, not because of ideology, but because of the click-through rate. They invent a narrative, the 161-year-old nurse, and they wrap it in the aesthetic of a legitimate news site, the Dr. Griffin validation. They rely on the social media platforms to distribute the controversy. The algorithm favors the content that generates the most reaction. Anger is the highest engagement metric. Therefore, the algorithm optimizes for Barnum-style hoaxes. The incentive is to lie. The payoff is ad revenue. The risk is zero, because the news cycle moves too fast for the correction to catch the falsehood. Look at the influencer economy. It is the Fiji mermaid strategy, the curation of a life that does not exist. The blurring of the line between a person and a brand. The audience knows it is partially fake, but they consume it anyway. They argue about it in the comments. Is this real? Is this staged? The question itself generates the value. The influencer monetizes the ambiguity, just as Barnum monetized the question of the mermaid's origin. Look at reality television and cancel culture. It is the ethnological congress. We watch them have breakdowns. We watch them fight. We watch them be destroyed. We feel a sense of moral superiority as we scroll past their public shaming. We are the Victorian crowd staring at the wild men of Borneo, tossing peanuts at the cage, convinced of our own civilization, while we indulge in the most primitive form of the voyeurism. One interpretation is that this is simply the democratization of media, that the gatekeepers are gone, and the people are free to choose their own truth. But the arithmetic suggests otherwise. The removal of gatekeepers did not create freedom. It created a vacuum that was filled by the most efficient manipulators. The incentives of the digital economy are purely Barnumesque. Truth is slow, complex, and often boring. Lies are fast, simple, and emotionally satisfying. In a marketplace of attention, the lie has a competitive advantage. The fake will always outcompete the real, because the fake can be optimized for engagement, while the real is constrained by facts. That we have fact-checkers, that we have community notes, that we have media literacy. But this ignores the fundamental psychological hook Barnum discovered. People do not want to be corrected. They want to be entertained. And more importantly, they want to have their biases confirmed. Barnum didn't trick people because they were stupid. He tricked them because they wanted to believe in the mermaid. They wanted to believe in the 161-year-old nurse. The fraudster and the mark are co-conspirators. We click the link because we want the dopamine hit of the outrage. We share the story because we want the social credit of being the first to know. We are not victims of the algorithm. We are the fuel. The endgames are clear. History shows us where a society goes when it loses its grip on shared reality. Endgame 1: controlled decline. The fragmentation of society into distinct reality tunnels. We cease to have a common language or a common set of facts. Tribalism increases. Trust in all institutions, media, science, government evaporates. We become a nation of skeptics who believe nothing and therefore will fall for anything. This mirrors the late 19th century yellow journalism era, where sensationalism led to the Spanish-American War, a conflict largely manufactured by newspaper tycoons, using Barnum's playbook Endgame to chaotic collapse. The total saturation of the information space with noise, deepfakes, and AI-generated content make it impossible to distinguish a video of a real event from a fabrication. The legal system buckles because evidence can no longer be trusted. Civil unrest explodes based on rumors that are debunked hours later, but the damage is already done. This mirrors the social panic of the witch trials or the Great Fear, but accelerated to the speed of light. Endgame 3: reset and restructure. The imposition of a hard truth from above. Draconian censorship. The public, exhausted by the constant deception, trades their freedom for the security of a single authorized narrative. This happened in the authoritarian regimes of the 20th century, where the chaos of the Weimar era gave way to the rigid propaganda of the total state. The only variable is timing and pain. We are currently in the late stages of the dilution of reality. The total spectacle is visible on the horizon. Barnum's ghost is laughing. He showed us the trick in 1835. He showed us that the truth is fragile and the lie is profitable. He built the zoo, and we voluntarily walked inside and locked the door behind us. Subscribe to this channel. Preparation is not about hoarding gold or building a bunker. It is about hardening your mind. It is about recognizing the script when you see it. It is about understanding the incentive structure of the information. You can soon verify the source. Question the outrage. Do not pay the admission fee to the circus of the lie. The show only goes on as long as there is an audience.